Hey all, it's Starzy, and today we are going to be doing my February wrap-up. Unfortunately, we are probably going to have to get used to crappy lamp lighting more often since I don't have as much time to film during the days anymore, since life is getting busier. So we have to accept that. But I think I read 10 books in February. Maybe, we'll see. So let's just get right on into them. It's being really loud, I can't reach my phone and he can't hear me because of his headset. Bye! Okay, so, the first thing that I read in February was Recursion by Blake Crouch. Now, I'm not sure what I can really say about this book because this is one of those books that you really shouldn't know too much about because part of the fun of the journey is discovering what's actually going on. But this is another book, I will say, that made my brain hurt because there's just so much going on and there's so much to think about and kind of theorize and philosophize. So there's that. I really enjoyed this book. What I will say is we start off with this premise of there are people kind of going about their everyday lives, and then all of a sudden some people are suddenly having two sets of complete memories of, you know, two completely separately lived lives, and nobody really knows what's going on, and that's having some very negative consequences for some people. So that's a general setup. Interesting ride. I don't think you should know too much going in, and yeah, I think I gave it 4 out of 5. Just, I overthink things, so. Oh, yeah. Start off with the book that you can't say anything about. This is a great way to start the video, but I recommend it. Well, I wouldn't recommend it to everyone because not everyone would be into the mind twisty science stuff, but anyway. The second book is not going to help me get on track with this video at all because the second thing that I completed in February was Dracula by Bram Stoker, which I started reading in October. So, if you want to know any of my thoughts about this book, like I talked about it in a bunch of October videos, and my thoughts haven't really changed much. Like, I'm glad that I read it for its place in literature, but I didn't necessarily completely enjoy the experience. It clearly took me a long time to get through it. And also just reading classic literature can be really difficult just because of how outdated obviously a lot of stuff's going to be. Like, if I was going to take anything from this book, what did I learn from it? I learned that women are apparently stupid unless they have a man's brain like Mina does. Foreigners cannot be trusted, and women's sexuality needs to be kept in check. Classics can be difficult to read because of underlying themes and messages that are clearly very outdated for our society. Although I have definitely known people in my everyday life who still subscribe to some of those ideals. But, yeah, it has an important place in literature, especially vampires in our popular media. Glad I've finally completed it, and I can put this behind me. I'm sorry, Vanessa. Let's move on from that with a book I actually rated 5 stars, and I don't give out 5 stars very often, but this book is a book that I just didn't want to put down, and I felt it so engaging the entire way through. Like, often, and this is a very big book, mind you, and yet the entire time I felt completely engaged. At no point did it feel like a slow slog or anything. Like, it was just the whole way through complete engagement, which is very rare, especially for a large book. So that is The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter, which is a fantasy story following this boy who's essentially out for revenge. It is largely a revenge story, and because the main character is so hell-bent on revenge, it also makes him quite stupid and blind to things that are going on or how he should be behaving a lot of the time. So it's one of those ones where it's one of those books where if you have to like and agree with the main characters to enjoy the story that might hinder your enjoyment of this, because yeah, just some of the time it was a bit like, boy, chill. But yeah, I just complete I can't talk about things I like. Yeah, just the fact, like, at no point did I want to put this book down. I breezed through it, and it's a chunker. We've got a little bit of dragony stuff in there. I love dragons. We had some training stuff, some kind of war stuff, which isn't necessarily my favorite stuff, but it's still found engaging. A little bit of low-key romance stuff. Like, it's not perfect just in terms of the fact some of the characters were getting really frustrating to me at points, especially the main character, but I just was so engaged throughout this entire journey of this book that I just got to the end and was like, I can't not give this 5 stars after that level of being enthralled into a book and what was going on. What are words? There's also some like magic stuff going on here, as you'd expect from a fantasy. I know this is a book I didn't really give any real synopsis for because I'm just in like blah, blah, blah mode, because that's what me really loving things turns me into, apparently. I really enjoyed this book. 5 stars. Cool. I know the sequel's already out, so I need to get on that. There were also some really sad moments. Just some stuff that I wasn't surprised it happened, but so it's you know, not a book that necessarily pulls its punches. Alright, I know this is a bit of a new thing for me, actually having a whole bunch of books to hold up, because I read kind of primarily physical books from the library and I still have them all, so that's new for this channel. The next book I read I also really enjoyed, and that is Incendiary by Zoraida Cordova, which is a YA fantasy. I rated this 4 out of 5 stars, and this story is set in this fantasy world that has its own magic system, different types of magics, and the backdrop is this kind of revolution, rebellion stuff going on, because there's some unhappy political stuff and all of that. You know, the king not being very nice, and people not really trusting the prince as well, and all of that kind of stuff. And our main character has memory magic, where she can like pull memories out of people, and they will no longer have that memory, but it'll be in her head. As I also briefly mentioned this when I was talking about my anticipated releases, because the sequel comes out in May. But another thing that was interesting about this was that it did kind of explore mental health and trauma, in terms of the fact that she seemed to have repressed a lot of her own memories of things that had happened when she was a child. And so that was really interesting as well, because a lot of the time, like, we as readers didn't really know what was going on either, because we were looking through her eyes and she couldn't remember stuff, but then people would say stuff around her, and there was this really interesting, relationships and background with some of the characters that she just had no idea about. I can't really get too much into this book without getting spoilery, but I enjoyed seeing a lot of the different elements that came to play with this book and the different dynamics between characters, especially with some of the stuff that was revealed kind of later on. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the second one. I don't know why I'm starting so many new series when I'm already in the middle of so many, because these are both first books in series, but I don't care. I loved reading both of them, so. But yeah, this is a YA fantasy that I really enjoyed, which past few years I haven't always had great experiences with YA fantasy, so it's good to see that I can still find ones that I'm very much into. So I've got a sticky note here because this is a book I read an ebook of. And so this was The Gilded Ones by Namina Fauna, which this is a brand new release. It's been getting a lot of buzz. I've been seeing a lot of people talk about how much they loved this book, and I just wasn't there. I didn't enjoy reading this. This is a YA fantasy. It is another YA fantasy, and this one is one where when girls come of a certain age, they have to do like a bleeding ceremony to test their purity. Test their purity, and they're pure if their blood runs red. If their blood runs gold, you know, they're not, and the punishment for that is death. And of course our main character's blood runs gold, and things go from there. There were definitely some very interesting things in this book, and I appreciated a lot of what this book was trying to do, but I think how much I didn't really enjoy it came down to a number of factors. First of all, when you look at the cover of this book, it definitely doesn't give off the vibes of what you end up reading. Because this book is so much darker than I was expecting, especially for a YA. It is probably much darker and more graphic than maybe any other YA fantasy I've ever read, because the world that we're in is extremely misogynistic. As I said, the punishment for your blood running gold is death, and there are very graphic descriptions of violence happening in this book, and we also have things like off-page sexual assault of children. So there's a lot of very hard things to read in here, and I wasn't expecting that. And the other thing is that I am used to reading a lot of dark and hard to read stuff. I mean, horror is one of my favorite genres in both like books and movies. So I've been exposed to a lot of dark media, but reading this, like, I don't know, it wasn't even like an interesting exploration of it for me for the first part of the book. Like, it was just unpleasant to read for me. I was just finding myself really uncomfortable and upset, and not in this book's interesting kind of way, but just in this is a bit much for this story. I don't know, like, that's just, I don't know why that's where it was laying for me, because as I've said, I've consumed so much other stuff, but that's kind of where I was to begin with. And I think the other thing that was contributing to that, of how difficult it was for me to read, is because you're coming from this girl's perspective, like you're in her head, and she's been raised in this society that, you know, treats women a certain way, and so she's grown up being told things that obviously she's going to believe. So we're in her head, and so we're constantly being told all these things about women, what women should and shouldn't be, and what they should and shouldn't do. And because it's becoming from that first person perspective, it's kind of like these things are being bashed over our head for a good portion of this book, in a way that's like not questioned until much later on, because obviously it's the type of book where stuff's gonna happen and she is going to be changing some of these ideas she's grown up with. It's the nature of the book. It does have those kind of more feminist undertones that come in later. But yeah, it made me very, very uncomfortable at the start of this book, the way that was all written, which, again, from reviews I've watched, doesn't seem to have been bothered anyone else. But that's where I was sitting at the beginning, so I was already having a hard time just because of that. But then on top of that, the pacing was really weird. Like, something would happen and then there'd be this huge time jump all of a sudden. And there were a few instances of these big time jumps. So the pacing was also really weird. And then there was also just some plot stuff that I found a bit weird, of like, I didn't love how some of the plot unraveled, and there were also some moments where it was kind of like, is that really what they would have decided to do? So yeah, I don't know what I ended up rating this. 2.5 at the most. There's probably much more, to be honest, because I read this quite early on in February, so by now, like, I haven't really actively thought about it much since, so there's probably a lot I've forgotten because I remember I was feeling a lot while reading it. But I think there's some of the main things, like just my general discomfort with reading how the start of the book went, and also just not expecting it, because yeah, like, you look at that cover. I looked at that cover and I saw people just talking about this, new YA fantasy with, you know, strong woman power kind of vibes. That's all I really saw about it before jumping into it, and then that's just not what it was for the first half of the book. So that, and then the plot and the pacing, some of it just, yeah, I don't know, like, I can see what it was trying to do, but I don't know, it just didn't work for me. And obviously it's working for a lot of people and a lot of people are loving it, so I'm happy for you, but not me. I did not really enjoy the reading experience all that much. It had its few moments, but overall, yeah. Alright, moving on from that with something a bit more positive, because I then continued on with listening to the audiobooks of my childhood favourite series. So I listened to City of the Rats, which is the third book in the Del Toro Quest series. To be honest, because I was listening to it on audiobook, I tuned out a few times because I was doing other things while listening to it. But from what I did actually hear, again, it was just another nostalgic trip into this fantasy series. I've talked about it the past 2 months, so I'm not gonna keep telling you a general synopsis of this series, but children's fantasy series, that was my favourite. I'm still enjoying it now as an adult, both because of the nostalgia and also because there's just still some interesting stuff that I appreciate in this, and they're also really short, so fun things to listen to. I then read an ebook of Slayer by Kirsten White, and this is a book that I kind of don't know entirely how I feel. Now, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, if you can tell even from this little corner here, has been my favourite TV show for a very long time. Although Joss Whedon is a trash human, as I've known for a long time, but all the stuff that came out recently, oh boy. But, all the same, have always loved that show. It does mean a lot to me, and this is a book set in the Slayerverse, the Slayer universe, sometime after the TV show ended, where, you know, all these girls have been activated as Slayers, and this is following a girl who's just become a Slayer, who is actually part of the Watchers. And first of all, I didn't love reading from the perspective of the Watchers. You know, never really liked the Watchers. I don't think anyone who watched Buffy probably could with some of their actions. And there's not very many left by this book either. But I didn't love that. And also, the main character of this book just talks about how much she hates Buffy, like, every few pages. And it kind of just got to the point like, okay girl, we get it. Please, move on, think about something else. Like, it was a bit much. So I didn't love that. Didn't necessarily love all the characters. But it also, like, I also just did love being back in this world though, and there were a couple of cameos from people that were a bit kind of cool. I definitely had a few issues with it, but I also felt very nostalgic about it. And so it was kind of just an okay reading experience for me. I guess we end up in the middle at like a 3 out of 5. Because I don't really know entirely how I feel, but like I didn't hate the experience, and it did definitely have a little bit of that nostalgia for me. So I then read Birds of Prey, Black Canary, which is actually, like, don't be fooled by the cover and the way this has been bound up. It's not about the diner that we see in the Birds of Prey movie. It's actually a bind-up of a run from some years earlier, where we're following Dinah, who at this point in time is the lead singer of like a rock band, and they're on tour, so that's the vibes we're going with. I give this like a 2 out of 5. Didn't love it. The other thing is, the way they've done this bind-up is clearly, like it even says on the back, meet the character that inspired the film in this classic story. Oh yeah, so this is the diner that we're going with in this comic. So they've clearly put this together as to kind of be an introduction to the character, I guess, but it's really poor choice, I think. I think it's a very poor choice for an introduction to the character. Definitely very different vibes to any of the Black Canary stuff that I've been exposed to previously in comics or shows like Justice League Unlimited. And also, it is one of those comics that has a few moments that, a number of moments that connect to other things that have happened to Black Canary in the comics. So yeah, I don't think it's a good introduction. So that's one set of problems. I also just didn't love this in general. Like, it was kind of just okay as a story. It felt a bit weird, just like the random traveling and violence. There were a few nice moments, like when Batgirl came in, but otherwise, and also the art was a bit disjointed and wasn't my favorite. So yeah, Didn't love this. Don't think it's a good introduction to the character, but like it's okay. And like I guess seeing Dinah fronting a band was kind of cool. Then I read A Tangle of Spells by Michelle Harrison. So if you've watched my most anticipated books video, you'll know that this was one of my most anticipated books for the year. So this is the third book in the Pinch of Magic series. Is that what the series is called? I don't know. That's what the first book is. But it's a children's fantasy series following three sisters and kind of their misadventures. This one in particular is set in this little town with a creepy old house, and there's some weird stuff going on, and there's a history of witches in the town, and all of that kind of stuff. So it's got some... I think this is actually one of the creepiest books I've read, to an extent. Like, there were some moments that were creepier than moments in, like, actual horror books I've read. I don't know what it was about them, but yeah. So that's something to know about this series as well, is that as wholesome as the series can be, these books do sometimes have creepy elements. But really enjoyed this. 4 out of 5. Yeah, third book in a series. I haven't read the first book yet, but I've read the second and third and really enjoyed both of them so far. So it's a series I recommend if you want to read more children's fiction. I then listened to another audiobook of continuing another series from my childhood. I listened to The Sudden Life by Philip Pullman, which is the second book in his Dark Materials. This is what the series is called, right? A children's fantasy trilogy. And I can't really say anything about this book because it would be a spoiler for the first book. But in the first book, we're following Lyra in this world where people's, essentially, like, their souls are physical manifestations, because like everyone has this demon, this little companion who can talk and everything, that takes the form of some kind of animal. And this series also has a lot of discussions about religion and various other things. And yeah, I really enjoy it. I really enjoy it. Second book in the series, can't say anything without spoiling the first book, but I really enjoy this series, both just from the magical fantasy stuff going on, but also some of the deeper discussions that it pulls out can be interesting at times too, especially now reading it as an adult. So yeah. Also, there was a sad moment in this book, and it just reminded me that, like, I'm not someone who cries reading books very often, but I'm just remembering that the third book in this series, I'm pretty sure, is one of the only books that has ever made me cry. So I'm not sure whether I'm looking forward to getting to that now. And then the last book that I read in February was an ARC copy of Second First Impressions by Sally Thorne, which I believe is released in Australia in March, but the Goodreads date was later, maybe in April. I think Sally Thorne's an Australian author, and so that's why it's releasing here slightly earlier. But she's the author of The Hating Game. It's a romance author. The Hating Game was a really popular romance when that came out. I've never read it before, so this is the first Sally Thorne that I read. But this is a romance following a woman who works at like a retirement village. She works in like a retirement village, and basically this kind of bad boy enters her life and shakes things up a little, I guess is a simple way to kind of explain some of what's going on there. This was definitely kind of cheesy, but I wouldn't expect anything else from a romance novel like this. Another thing I will say though is that this book was very much kind of sweet rather than smutty, in a way a lot of romance novels can tend to be. Like it was very tame. It was very tame on that level, which I think I saw a review of someone saying that Sally Thorne's other books haven't necessarily been that way, so that might be something to know. But I did really enjoy this overall, and I read it really quickly. You know, romance books can be really easy reads, and so I enjoyed the experience, and it was a quick read. I haven't rated it yet because I haven't written my review yet, because I need to submit that. But what would I rate it? 3.5? I don't know. I did really enjoy it, but I did also have a few little things about it. I kind of consumed it so quickly, let me try and slow down and think about what was going on. One of the things in this book was the way that our protagonist was quite insecure in her appearance and never really interacted with other people outside of the retirement home, and it was only a man kind of convincing her that she was beautiful that changed any of that. So that always makes me a little bit uncomfy when, you know, the story relies on needing a man that you're romantically interested in to change anything about how you feel about yourself. That's always a bit of a area. The other thing was she was portrayed as quite a like awkward virginal character. Is that what I'm trying to say? Kind of like she technically wasn't a virgin, but like in the way she was portrayed, like she pretty much was. I don't know. No, I only just finished this, so clearly I haven't fully wrapped my head around how I feel about it yet to be able to explain it well to you. But that was the other thing that made me a bit especially then because we had like this bad boy who was very experienced and all of that kind of stuff. Like they're two things that on their own like can be done in a fine way, and they weren't necessarily approached badly. They're just those type of things that you see so often in media that it gets to this point where it kind of instantly makes me go a bit when I see it again. Outside of that, like, the relationship was cute. It was kind of like friends to lovers, really. Well, it was kind of like, they were kind of like standoffish to begin with, but then they became friends to lovers. So, like, the relationship was cute, and there was something I really loved about this book was just like the cast of characters. Like, there were these two old women who were a good time. There was also her best friend who she worked with, who was interesting, although she also had her own problems in kind of like internalized misogyny, we'll call it. A few little things she said. But the whole cast was really interesting, and their dynamics was lovely and beautiful and sad at times, which that's always something that makes me love a romance novel much more, when you have this really interesting supporting cast of characters. I love a good cast of characters in a romance, even if obviously the focus is going to be on the main two. So I loved the cast of characters. The relationship was pretty wholesome overall. There weren't really any... I don't feel like there was anything that really got on my nerves either in terms of like plot and conflict, because a lot of romances, conflicts they have at the end sometimes just make me really frustrated and like, why is that even happening? But I feel like a lot of what was going on here was fairly realistic, acceptable. Although the other thing of this book was everyone was so open in talking really personal around like basically strangers. Like, does that happen? Does that happen? There were a few little things that made me go a bit, it was very cheesy, but in a good fun way. I would probably recommend this romance if you just want something that's kind of sweet and wholesome with a guy who has long hair and tattoos. There's something I can't really talk about without it being kind of spoilery, but like, who hands a teenager a huge wad of money? That's all I'll say, because that was like, really? As much as there was those few little things that gave me a little bit of pause, I did really enjoy this romance. To an extent, I would probably reread it, just for the feels. I have been here much longer than usual for just talking about books, so I think this is another month where the things I watched will be a separate video. That is everything that I read in February. I read some things that I really loved. I read some things I didn't feel so great about. And I also got some nostalgia with some childhood favourites. I don't know, as usual, just like, let me know if you've read any of these and what you think about them. What was your favourite thing that you read in February? Yeah, I usually don't spend longer than like 20 minutes talking about the books I read. There's almost 40 minutes on that timer there. I don't know what happened. Anyway, yeah, we're gonna sign off here before we go loopy. Stay safe, stay educated, and Starzy out.